Chapter 1. The Discovery. Harry Potter had never been early for anything in his life, and yet here he stood, outside the stone gargoyle that guarded Dumbledore's office, 15 minutes before his scheduled appointment. The password, "Fizzing Whizbiz," felt sticky on his tongue as he spoke it, and the spiral staircase began its slow, familiar ascent. 3 weeks had passed since the first task, and Harry's shoulder still ached when the weather turned cold. The Hungarian horntail had been a nightmare of scales and fury, but he'd survived it. Barely. Now Dumbledore wanted to discuss preparation strategies for the second task, though Harry suspected these meetings had less to do with the tournament and more to do with the headmaster's concern about how Harry had managed to summon his firebolt so successfully. The other champions hadn't performed nearly as well. He knocked once on the heavy oak door and heard Dumbledore's voice call, "Enter." But when Harry pushed open the door, the office was empty. The circular room hummed with its usual collection of whirring silver instruments, their soft mechanical breathing the only sound in the space. Portraits of former headmasters dozed in their frames, occasionally muttering in their sleep. Fawkes sat on his perch, preening his brilliant feathers with the careful attention of someone who had all the time in the world. Harry hesitated in the doorway. He could wait outside, but the corridor was cold, and besides, Dumbledore had told him to enter. Surely the headmaster would return soon. He settled into the chair across from the enormous claw-footed desk and tried not to fidget. The office always made him feel simultaneously important and small. Important because so few students were invited here. Small because the weight of centuries seemed to press down from every portrait and artifact. A soft metallic chime drew his attention to the left side of the desk, where one of the more elaborate silver instruments had begun to wobble on its spindle legs. Harry watched with idle curiosity as the device, which looked like a cross between a compass and a gyroscope, swayed more violently with each passing second. "Careful there," he murmured, as if the instrument could hear him. It couldn't, of course, and with a final decisive tilt, the entire contraption toppled sideways. Harry lunged forward to catch it, his reflexes sharp from years of Quidditch, but his elbow knocked against the desk's edge in the process. The impact sent a jolt of pain up his arm and caused something behind the desk to click, a sound so soft he almost missed it. When Harry looked up from examining his bruised elbow, he saw that a small panel in the desk's side had slid open, revealing a narrow compartment he'd never noticed before. The opening was barely wide enough for a man's hand, and from within it he could see the corner of what looked like parchment. He glanced around the office. Still empty. Even the portrait seemed to be sleeping more deeply than usual. Harry knew he shouldn't. This was Dumbledore's private desk, and the headmaster clearly used that compartment to store sensitive materials. But curiosity had always been Harry's weakness, and the parchment was right there, practically begging to be investigated. His fingers found 8 letters tied together with a faded blue ribbon. They were addressed in careful, childish handwriting to Mr. H. Potter, Cupboard under the Stairs, 4 Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. The return address made his breath catch. D. Greengrass, Greengrass Manor, Yorkshire. Daphne Greengrass. Harry knew the name. She was in his year, a Slytherin with pale blonde hair who rarely spoke during shared classes. He'd never exchanged more than a dozen words with her in 4 years of schooling. Why would she be writing to him? The ribbon came undone with a gentle tug, and Harry spread the letters across his lap. They were dated, he realized, 1 for each year going back to 1987. The oldest letter bore the careful script of a 7-year-old, while the most recent showed the confident handwriting of someone his own age. Harry opened the first letter, the one from 1987, and began to read. Dear Harry Potter, my governess told me about what happened to your mummy and daddy. She said a bad man killed them when you were just a baby, and that's why you have that scar. I think that's very sad. I asked my mummy if we could invite you for tea, but she said we don't know where you live. I hope someone is taking good care of you. I hope you have toys and books and someone to read you stories. My daddy reads to me every night before bed, and it makes me feel safe. I know you probably won't write back, because you're too little to write letters yet, but I wanted you to know that someone thinks about you and hopes you're happy. Your friend, I hope. Daphne Greengrass P.S. I drew you a picture of a unicorn, because they're very beautiful and magical like you must be. Harry stared at the letter until the words blurred. Someone had been thinking about him when he was 7 years old. Someone had cared enough to write. A Slytherin girl he barely knew had wondered about his welfare and wanted him to feel less alone. And he'd never received the letter. The realization hit him like a bludger to the chest. These letters had been sent to him, all of them, and somehow they'd ended up in a hidden compartment of Dumbledore's desk instead of in his hands. Harry's fingers shook as he opened the second letter, dated 1988. Dear Harry, I sent you a letter last year, but you never wrote back. My governess says maybe you can't read yet, because some children learn slower than others. That's okay. I learned to read when I was 6, but my cousin Marcus didn't learn until he was 8, and he's very clever now. I saw you once this summer in Diagon Alley, with a very large man who was buying you ice cream. You looked happy, but also a little scared. I wanted to come say hello, but Mummy said we mustn't bother you, because you're famous, and probably tired of people staring at you. Are you excited about going to Hogwarts someday? I am. Daddy says all the Greengrasses have been in Slytherin House for hundreds of years. What house do you think you'll be in? I hope it's Slytherin so we can be friends. Your friend, Daphne. The memory came flooding back. His 8th birthday, if you could call it that. Hagrid taking him to Diagon Alley for the first time. The wonder of discovering he was a wizard. The overwhelming sensation of being recognized everywhere he went. And somewhere in that crowd, a blonde girl had been watching him with enough care to notice his emotions. Harry opened the 3rd letter, then the 4th. With each year, Daphne's writing grew more sophisticated, but her concern for his welfare never wavered. She wrote about hoping he was happy with his relatives, about her excitement when they'd finally be at Hogwarts together, about her worry when she heard about the troll in his first year. By the time he reached the letter from 1993, written during the chaos of Sirius Black's escape, Harry's throat was tight with emotions he couldn't name. Dear Harry, I know you might think it's silly that I keep writing to you when you never write back, but I can't stop worrying about you. Everyone at Hogwarts is talking about Sirius Black wanting to kill you, and I see how the teachers watch you all the time now, how you never really smile anymore. I want you to know that if you ever need help, really need it, you could trust me. I know I'm just a Slytherin, and we're supposed to be enemies or something equally ridiculous, but I've been caring about you for 6 years now. That has to count for something. Please be careful. Please stay alive. Always your friend, Daphne. The sound of footsteps on the spiral staircase made Harry's heart hammer against his ribs. He looked up to find Dumbledore standing in the doorway, his blue eyes immediately focusing on the letters spread across Harry's lap. Ah, Dumbledore said quietly, closing the door behind him. I see you've discovered Miss Greengrass's correspondence. Harry's mouth felt dry as desert sand. You knew about these? I have known about them, yes. Dumbledore moved to his chair with the careful steps of a man suddenly feeling his age. Miss Greengrass has been quite persistent in her attempts to contact you over the years. Attempts? Harry's voice cracked on the word. These aren't attempts. These are letters. Letters addressed to me. Letters you intercepted. Harry, you must understand. I don't understand anything. Harry shot to his feet, the letters clutched in his fists. She's been writing to me since I was 7 years old, and I never knew. How many others? How many other people tried to contact me? Dumbledore settled heavily into his chair, and for the first time in Harry's memory, the headmaster looked truly weary. Several. Over the years, several people have attempted to reach you directly, and you stopped them all. I protected you from potentially harmful influences. Harmful? Harry held up Daphne's first letter, his hand shaking with fury. She drew me a picture of a unicorn. She was 7 years old and worried about whether I had bedtime stories. What exactly was harmful about that? Dumbledore's fingers steepled beneath his chin. Miss Greengrass comes from a family with complicated loyalties, Harry. The Greengrasses have maintained neutrality in our conflicts, but neutrality itself can be— Stop! Harry's voice was quiet now, which somehow made it more dangerous. Just stop. She was a child. She was a child who cared about me when no one else did, and you decided I wasn't allowed to know about it. For a long moment, the only sound in the office was the soft whirring of the silver instruments and the occasional rustle of sleeping portraits. I believed, Dumbledore said finally, that it was better for you to form relationships naturally, without the burden of obligation or artificial connection. Artificial? Harry stared at him. She wrote to me for 7 years. 7 years of caring about someone she'd never met. And you call that artificial? Harry carefully folded the letters and slipped them inside his robes, his movements deliberate and controlled. I think we can postpone that discussion about the second task, Professor. Harry! But Harry was already walking toward the door, his spine straight and his jaw set. When he reached the threshold, he turned back to find Dumbledore watching him with something that might have been regret. For 7 years, Harry said quietly, I thought no one cared about me, except the people you told me to trust. I thought I was completely alone, until I came to Hogwarts. But I wasn't alone, was I? Someone was thinking about me, worrying about me, hoping I was happy, and you decided I didn't deserve to know. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving Dumbledore alone with his silver instruments and his sleeping portraits, and the weight of choices that suddenly felt much heavier than they had that morning. Harry descended the spiral staircase with careful, measured steps, the letters safe against his chest. 7 years of friendship he'd been denied. 7 years of someone caring about him, genuinely and without expectation, and he'd never known. But he knew now, and everything was about to change. Chapter 2. Reading the Letters. The room of requirement had never felt more necessary than it did in this moment. Harry paced the 7th floor corridor 3 times, his mind focused on a single, desperate need. I need somewhere private to read these letters. Somewhere no one will find me. Somewhere I can think. The familiar door materialized, and Harry slipped inside to find exactly what he'd hoped for. A small, comfortable room with a single armchair beside a crackling fireplace. Warm lamplight cast a golden glow over everything, and thick carpets muffled any sound from the corridor beyond. It felt like the opposite of Dumbledore's office, all warmth where that space had been cold with betrayal. Harry settled into the armchair and spread the 8 letters across the small side table in chronological order. His hands were steadier now than they'd been in Dumbledore's office, but his heart still hammered against his ribs as he prepared to read 7 years of friendship he'd been denied. The first letter, written when they were both 7, he'd already read, that careful, childish script speaking of tea invitations and bedtime stories and hopes that someone was taking care of him. Even now, Remembering it made his throat tight. The second letter, from 1988, was longer. Dear Harry, I hope you're learning to read now, because I really want you to see my letters someday. I've been practicing my writing, so you won't think I'm stupid when we finally meet. Daddy took me to Diagon Alley again last week, and I looked for you everywhere but didn't see you. I did see that big man again, though. The one who was buying you ice cream last time. He was at the bookstore, buying something called Dragon Breeding for Pleasure and Profit, which sounds very dangerous. I hope he's nice to you. My cousin told me that some wizard children have to live with muggles if their parents die, and the muggles don't understand magic. Is that what happened to you? Are you allowed to do magic at home? I practiced levitation with my mother's wand yesterday, don't tell her, and made a feather float for almost 3 seconds. I know you probably can't write back yet, but I hope you know that I think about you. Mummy says I'm too young to understand what happened to your parents, but I think losing your mummy and daddy would be the worst thing in the whole world. Your friend, Daphne P.S. I'm enclosing a chocolate frog card of your father. Daddy says James Potter was very brave. Harry's breath caught. She'd sent him a chocolate frog card of his father, something he would have treasured beyond measure at 8 years old, when he knew nothing about James Potter, except that he was dead. How many nights had he lain in his cupboard, wondering what his parents had looked like, what kind of people they'd been. And Daphne had tried to give him that gift. The 1989 letter showed her growing understanding. Dear Harry, I asked my governess why you never write back, and she said maybe your guardians don't let you send mail. That made me very angry. Every child should be allowed to have friends. I've been reading about famous wizards because I want to understand what happened to your family. The books say, you know who was the most terrible dark wizard who ever lived, and that your parents died protecting you. They say your mother's love saved your life, and that's why you're called the boy who lived. I don't think you chose to be famous, and I don't think you like it very much. When I saw you in Diagon Alley last summer, you looked sad, even though everyone was smiling at you. It must be very lonely to have everyone stare at you, but no one really see you. I promise that when we go to Hogwarts together, I'll see you. Not the famous boy, but really you. Always your friend, Daphne. By the 4th letter, written when they were 10, Harry could see Daphne's growing sophistication and the first hints of her analytical mind. Dear Harry, next year we'll finally be at Hogwarts together. I can hardly wait. I've been reading Hogwarts: A History, and it sounds wonderful and terrible and magical all at once. I hope you don't mind that I'm in Slytherin House. I know all the Greengrasses have been Slytherin for centuries, so that's where I'll probably go. Daddy says Slytherins and Gryffindors don't get along very well, but I think that's silly. Houses are just where you sleep and study. They shouldn't determine who you're allowed to care about. I've been watching the older children when their families come to visit, and I've noticed something. The ones from light families always smile when they talk about school, but some of the children from dark families look careful, like they're afraid of saying the wrong thing. I hope Hogwarts isn't as divided as the adults make it sound. Do you ever wonder what house you'll be in? I hope it won't matter to our friendship. Your friend, Daphne. The letters from their Hogwarts years were longer and more detailed, filled with observations that made Harry realize how carefully Daphne had been watching him all along. The 1991 letter, written during their first year, was full of excitement about finally being at school together. Dear Harry, we're finally here. I can't believe I'm actually writing this from Hogwarts. I'm in Slytherin just like I expected, and I saw you get sorted into Gryffindor. You looked terrified on the stool, which I thought was very brave. Everyone else seemed to think being famous would make you confident, but I could tell you were just as nervous as the rest of us. I sit where I can watch the Gryffindor table during meals, and I've noticed that you don't eat very much. Are you feeling all right? The food here is wonderful, much better than what my governess used to make. I wanted to come talk to you after the troll incident, because you looked so pale and shaky. But my housemate said it would be inappropriate. I hate that word. Inappropriate. Why is it inappropriate to worry about someone who nearly got killed trying to save another student? I hope you know that at least one person in Slytherin thinks you're brave, not just famous. Your friend, Daphne. The 1992 letter, written during the Chamber of Secrets crisis, was longer and more worried. Dear Harry, this year has been terrible and frightening, and I'm so worried about you I can hardly concentrate in potions anymore. Everyone keeps saying you're the heir of Slytherin because you can speak to snakes, and it makes me furious. I know you're not dark. I've watched you for 2 years now, and you're the opposite of dark. You're the boy who risked his life for a first year he barely knew. I see how the other students look at you in the corridors now, how they whisper and point and hurry away. It must be awful to be feared by the very people you keep trying to protect. I want to tell them all how wrong they are, but I'm just an Slytherin girl and no one would listen. I heard that you saved Ginny Weasley's life by going into the chamber itself. The older Slytherins are angry about what happened to Professor Lockhart, but I think you're a hero. You keep saving people, Harry. You saved the Philosopher's Stone last year, you saved Ginny this year, and everyone just expects it of you now, like it's your job to be brave. It shouldn't be your job. You should get to be a child sometimes too. Your friend always, Daphne. The 1993 letter made Harry's chest ache with recognition. Dear Harry, I know about what the Dementors do to you on the Quidditch pitch and on the Hogwarts Express. I was there when you fell, and I saw your face afterward. You looked like someone who'd seen their worst nightmares made real. I've been reading about Dementors and what they do to people. They make you relive your worst memories, don't they? I can't imagine what it must be like for you, with the memories you must carry. My worst memory is when my pet Kneazle died when I was 8, and even thinking about it makes me want to cry. But your worst memory, Harry, I'm so sorry. Everyone talks about Sirius Black wanting to kill you, but I think the Dementors are worse. At least Black would be quick. The Dementors make you suffer first. I learned in defense that a Patronus can drive them away, but it's supposed to be very advanced magic. I hope Professor Lupin is teaching you to cast one. You shouldn't have to face those creatures defenseless. Please stay safe. Please don't be brave all by yourself. Your friend, Daphne. The final letter, dated just 2 months ago, was the most personal yet. Dear Harry, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I have to write it anyway. You're in the Triwizard Tournament now, and I'm terrified for you. Everyone keeps saying how exciting it is, how honored Hogwarts should be to have 2 champions. But all I can think about is how dangerous the tasks are supposed to be. You didn't put your name in that goblet. I know you didn't because I've watched you for 4 years now, and you never seek out danger. It just finds you anyway. Someone else put your name in there, someone who wanted you hurt, and now you're trapped because of a magical contract you never agreed to. I watch you in the Great Hall, and you look so tired, Harry, tired in a way that has nothing to do with sleep. Everyone expects you to be excited about this tournament, but I can see that you're frightened. You're 14 years old, and they're asking you to risk your life for sport. I wish I was brave enough to walk up to the Gryffindor table and tell you that someone believes in you. Someone who doesn't want you to win for the glory or the gold, but just wants you to come home safe. If something happens to you in this tournament, I want you to know that you weren't alone. For 8 years, someone has been caring about you. For 8 years, someone has been hoping you were happy and safe and loved. Always your friend, even if you never knew it. Daphne. Harry set down the final letter with shaking hands. 8 years. 8 years of someone watching him, worrying about him, seeing through the famous boy facade to the lonely child underneath. 8 years of friendship offered freely, without expectation, without agenda. She'd noticed things no one else had seen. His nervousness at the sorting, his poor appetite, his exhaustion after facing danger again and again. She'd defended him when his own house turned against him during the chamber crisis. She'd worried about his nightmares when the Dementors attacked. And through it all, she'd been writing to him, trying to reach him, believing that someday he might write back. Harry looked around the warm, quiet room the castle had provided for him. For the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to be truly known by another person. Not known as Harry Potter, the boy who lived, but known as someone worth caring about just because he existed. Daphne Greengrass had been trying to be his friend since they were 7 years old. And tomorrow, Harry decided, he was going to finally let her. He carefully folded the letters and tucked them safely inside his robes. There would be time to read them again later, time to memorize every word of care and concern and friendship he'd been denied. But first, he needed to figure out how to approach a girl who'd been trying to reach him for 8 years. How did you thank someone for caring about you when you didn't even know they existed? How did you begin a friendship that should have started when you were 7? Harry stared into the fireplace and tried to imagine walking up to Daphne Greengrass in front of her Slytherin housemates and saying, "Thank you for writing to me. I'm sorry I never wrote back. Would you like to be friends?" It seemed simultaneously impossible and absolutely necessary. Tomorrow, Harry thought, everything would change. Tonight, for the first time in his life, he fell asleep, knowing that someone had been thinking about him all along. Chapter 3. First Contact. Harry had never realized how difficult it was to casually encounter a specific Slytherin until he spent an entire day trying to do exactly that. He'd lurked near the dungeons during breakfast, wandered past the potions classroom between lessons, and even taken the long way to Defense Against the Dark Arts in hopes of spotting Daphne Greengrass somewhere along the route. By evening, he was beginning to think the universe was conspiring against him. It wasn't until after dinner, when most students had retreated to their common rooms or the library, that Harry finally caught sight of pale blonde hair disappearing around a corner near the dungeons. His heart hammered against his ribs as he quickened his pace, the 8 letters rustling softly in his robes with each step. He found her sitting alone in a small alcove overlooking the Black Lake, a thick defense textbook open across her knees. The underwater windows cast wavering patterns of green light across her face, and for a moment Harry hesitated. She looked so peaceful, so absorbed in her reading, that interrupting felt almost criminal. Then he remembered 8 years of intercepted letters and forced himself to step forward. Daphne. She looked up sharply, her pale blue eyes widening in surprise. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Harry realized this was probably the first time he'd ever said her name aloud, and from her expression, she was thinking the same thing. "Harry Potter," she said carefully, closing her textbook. "This is unexpected." Harry's carefully rehearsed opening lines evaporated. Standing here in front of her, he couldn't think of any graceful way to begin this conversation. How did you tell someone you'd been reading their personal letters? How did you explain that you'd only just discovered they existed? "I know this is going to sound mad," he began, then stopped. Everything about this situation sounded mad. Daphne tilted her head slightly, studying his face with the same intensity she'd probably been applying to her textbook moments before. "You look like you haven't slept," she observed. And you're nervous. Which is strange, because you faced a Hungarian horntail 6 weeks ago without blinking. The casual reference to his dragon encounter, delivered not with the breathless excitement most students showed, but with what sounded like genuine concern, gave Harry the courage to continue. "I found your letters," he said quietly. Daphne went very still. "My letters?" Harry pulled them from his robes, the blue ribbon slightly wrinkled from being carried around all day. 8 of them, hidden in a compartment in Dumbledore's desk. The colour drained from Daphne's face. She stared at the bundle in Harry's hands, as if it were a coiled snake. You read them?" "I'm sorry. I know I shouldn't have. But I didn't understand what they were until I opened the first one." Harry sat down on the stone bench across from her, careful to maintain distance. "You wrote to me for 8 years. 8 years," Daphne repeated faintly. "And they never reached you. Dumbledore intercepted them. All of them." Harry's voice was rougher than he'd intended. "I confronted him about it yesterday, and he said he was protecting me from potentially harmful influences." Daphne's expression shifted from shock to something much sharper. "Harmful influences." Her voice was deadly quiet. "I was 7 years old when I sent the first letter. What exactly did he think I was going to influence you to do? Share my biscuits?" Despite everything, Harry felt his mouth twitch toward a smile. "You mentioned drawing me a picture of a unicorn. Clearly a dark, magical artifact of the highest order," Daphne said dryly, though her hands were trembling slightly as she reached for the letters. "May I?" Harry handed them over and watched as she untied the ribbon with careful fingers. She opened the first letter, her 7-year-old handwriting looking impossibly young, and her breath hitched. "Oh, Merlin," she whispered. "I'd forgotten how terrible my penmanship was." "It wasn't terrible. It was—" Harry searched for the right word. "It was kind." Daphne looked up at him, and Harry saw something vulnerable in her expression that he'd never noticed during their shared classes. "You really read all of them?" "Twice." Harry's throat felt tight. "I know about the chocolate frog card you tried to send me, the one with my father on it." Daphne's eyes filled with tears. "You didn't know what he looked like, did you? When you were 8? I didn't know anything about him. About either of them." Harry leaned forward slightly. "Daphne, why did you write to me? We'd never even spoken." She was quiet for a long moment, staring down at the letters in her lap. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Because you looked so alone." The simple honesty of it hit Harry like a physical blow. "I was 9 the first time I saw you in Diagon Alley," Daphne continued. "It was before our 2nd year, and you were with that family, the Dursleys. I was with my parents at Flourish and Blotts, and I saw you standing by the cauldron display while they argued about school supplies." Harry remembered that day. Uncle Vernon complaining about the cost of everything, Aunt Petunia hissing at him to stop touching things, Dudley whining about being bored. "You looked—" Daphne struggled for words. "You looked like you were trying to make yourself invisible, like you were apologizing for existing. And I thought, that's Harry Potter, the famous boy everyone talks about, and he looks like he wishes he could disappear." "I did wish that," Harry admitted. "I always wished that." "I know." Daphne's voice was gentle. "I could see it. Even at Hogwarts, when everyone stared at you and whispered about you and expected things from you, you looked like you wanted to sink through the floor." Harry thought about all the times he'd felt exactly that way. In the Great Hall during 1st year, when Rita Skeeter cornered him, during the aftermath of every crisis he'd somehow become entangled in. "You were watching me," he said. It wasn't a question. "Not in a creepy way," Daphne said quickly, then blushed. "Or maybe it was a little creepy. But I was worried about you. You never seemed to eat enough at meals, and you always looked tired. And when things went wrong, like with the Chamber of Secrets, you looked like you were carrying the weight of the world. I felt like I was. I know. Daphne set the letters aside and looked directly at him. That's why I kept writing. I thought maybe if you knew someone was thinking about you, someone who didn't want anything from you except for you to be okay, it might help. Harry stared at her. This girl he'd barely noticed for 4 years had been offering him the one thing he'd needed most, and never known he could have, someone who cared about him, just because. You thought I was ignoring you, he said suddenly, understanding flooding through him. All those yours, you thought I was getting your letters and choosing not to respond. Daphne's cheeks reddened. Yes. I thought maybe I was being silly, or inappropriate, or that you had better things to do than respond to some random Slytherin girl. I would have written back. The words came out more forcefully than Harry intended. If I'd gotten them, I would have written back immediately. You were offering me friendship, and I didn't even know. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of 8 lost years settling between them. I'm sorry, Daphne said finally. I'm sorry you didn't know someone cared. I'm sorry Dumbledore decided for both of us that we weren't allowed to be friends. You have nothing to apologize for. Harry's voice was fierce. You tried to reach me for 8 years. You cared about a stranger just because you thought he needed someone to care about him. You have absolutely nothing to apologize for. Daphne's eyes were definitely watery now. What do we do now? Harry looked at her, really looked at her for what felt like the first time. The pale blonde hair that caught the green light from the lake, the intelligent blue eyes that had been watching him with concern since they were children, the hands that had written 8 letters full of kindness and worry and hope. Would you like to be friends? He asked. Actually friends this time? The smile that spread across Daphne's face was radiant. I've been wanting to be your friend since I was 7 years old, Harry Potter. I'm not stopping now. Good, Harry said, and found himself smiling back. Though we'll probably have to be careful about it. Gryffindors and Slytherins aren't exactly known for their close friendships. Daphne's expression turned thoughtful. Let them think what they want. I've spent 8 years caring about you from a distance. I'm not going to hide it anymore just because some people think house prejudice is more important than genuine affection. Harry felt something warm unfurl in his chest, something that felt like belonging, like being truly understood for the first time in his life. There's something else, he said quietly. I think Dumbledore's been intercepting other letters too. I want to find out how many people tried to contact me over the years. Daphne's eyes sharpened with interest. That could be quite a project. You'll need someone with research skills and access to certain social circles. Are you offering? Harry, Daphne said seriously, I've been trying to help you for 8 years. Do you really think I'm going to stop now that you finally know about it? Harry grinned. So we're doing this. Really? We're doing this. Daphne stood up and held out her hand. Hello, Harry Potter. I'm Daphne Greengrass, and I've been your friend since we were 7 years old. It's nice to finally meet you. Harry stood and took her hand, marveling at how right this felt after years of thinking he had to face everything alone. It's nice to meet you too, he said. I have a feeling this is going to change everything. Daphne's smile was soft and certain. I'm counting on it. Chapter 4. Secret meetings over the next week. Harry discovered that Hogwarts contained far more hidden spaces than he'd ever imagined. Daphne seemed to know every unused classroom, every forgotten alcove, every corridor that students rarely traveled. Their friendship, by necessity, became a series of clandestine meetings that felt both thrilling and slightly ridiculous. There, Daphne said, settling into a window seat in an abandoned Charms classroom on their 4th meeting. No one's used this room since Professor Kettleburn retired. The suits of armor in the corridor are spelled to alert anyone if teachers approach. Harry looked around the dusty space with its covered furniture and cobwebbed corners. How do you know about places like this? 4 years of being a Slytherin who needed quiet places to think, Daphne said simply. My housemates can be intense sometimes. Not all of them, but enough that I learned to value privacy. Harry sat across from her, noting the careful way she'd phrased that. Because of the pure blood stuff? Daphne's expression tightened slightly. Among other things. Many of the Slytherin families have very specific ideas about how their children should think, what they should value, who they should associate with. And you don't agree? I think, Daphne said slowly, that judging someone's worth by their blood status is about as logical as judging them by the color of their hair. She paused, then added quietly, That opinion has not made me popular in my dormitory. Harry studied her face, seeing something he recognized in her careful expression. They pressure you about it. My parents pressure me. My housemates pressure me. Half the Slytherin families are watching to see if the Greengrasses will maintain proper values in the new generation. Daphne's voice carried a bitterness that made her sound older than 14. I'm expected to marry well, meaning pure blood, and raise the next generation of proper Slytherin children who know their place in the natural order. That sounds awful. It is awful. Daphne looked out the window at the grey December sky. Do you know what they say about Muggle-borns in our common room? They call them mudbull. She stopped herself. They use words that make my skin crawl, and I'm supposed to nod along and agree because that's what good Slytherin girls do. Harry felt a surge of anger on her behalf. You don't, though. Agree, I mean. I think Hermione Granger is the brightest witch in our year, and anyone who can't see that because of her parentage is an idiot. Daphne's voice was fierce. I think blood purity is a myth created by frightened people who need to feel superior to someone. And I think the fact that you keep saving people, regardless of their house or blood status, says more about your character than any of their prejudices ever could. The conviction in her voice made something warm bloom in Harry's chest. He'd never heard anyone defend Hermione so passionately, especially not a Slytherin. Is that why you wrote to me? He asked. Because I didn't fit their expectations? I wrote to you because you looked like you needed a friend, Daphne said. But I kept writing because I realized you were nothing like what the pure blood families expected. They thought you'd be arrogant, entitled, eager for power and attention. Instead, you were just a lonely child who kept trying to protect people. Harry's throat felt tight. I never felt like I was protecting people. I felt like I was stumbling from one disaster to another. That's exactly what I mean. Daphne leaned forward slightly. You faced a basilisk to save Ginny Weasley, and you don't even see it as heroic. You see it as something you had to do. Because I did have to do it. And that, Daphne said softly, is why everything they believe about you is wrong. Harry felt heat rise in his cheeks and looked away. He still wasn't used to people speaking about him with such certainty, such understanding. Can I tell you something? Anything. The Dursleys. Harry struggled for words. He'd never talked about this with anyone except Dumbledore, and that conversation hadn't gone well. They didn't just treat me badly. They tried to make me disappear. Daphne went very still. What do you mean? They locked me in that cupboard for years, told their neighbors I didn't exist, fed me scraps, and punished me for anything magical that happened around me. The words came out in a rush, like poison being drained from a wound. They wanted me to be grateful they'd taken me in, but they made sure I knew I was a burden every single day. Daphne's hands clenched into fists. They abused you. I suppose they did. Harry had never used that word before, but hearing it from someone else made it feel real. But Dumbledore said it was for my protection, that my aunt's blood would keep me safe from Voldemort's followers. Safe from death threats, maybe, but what about safe from emotional torture? Daphne's voice was dangerous. What about safe from the kind of damage that makes a child believe he doesn't deserve love? Harry stared at her. How did you— Because I've been watching you for 4 years, and you act like someone who thinks caring about him is a temporary favor that might be revoked at any moment. Daphne's eyes were bright with unshed tears. You're always surprised when people show you kindness, always grateful for the smallest gestures, always ready to sacrifice yourself because you don't think your life has the same value as everyone else's. The accuracy of her observations hit Harry like a physical blow. I don't know how to think about myself any other way. Maybe, Daphne said gently. That's something we can work on together. Harry looked at her, really looked at her, and felt something shift inside his chest. This girl who barely knew him could see things about him that he'd never put into words. She understood him in ways that felt both terrifying and necessary. I want to find out what else Dumbledore has been hiding, he said quietly. If he intercepted your letters, there might be others. Daphne's expression sharpened with interest. That's a significant investigation. You'd need access to Owlpost records, mail routing information, possibly even the headmaster's private correspondence files. Dobby might help, Harry said, thinking aloud. He's got access to places I don't, and he's been grateful since I freed him. The house elf? That's actually brilliant. Daphne pulled a piece of parchment from her bag and began making notes. House elves can apparate within Hogwarts, they're invisible to most detection charms, and they have access to areas students can't reach. Harry watched her write, admiring the quick, efficient way her mind worked. You're enjoying this. I'm enjoying the puzzle, Daphne admitted. And I'm enjoying the chance to finally help you with something real instead of just writing letters you couldn't read. The letters helped more than you know, Harry said softly. Daphne looked up from her notes, and their eyes met across the small space. For a moment, something electric passed between them, an awareness that their friendship was becoming something deeper, more complicated. Harry, she said quietly, what happens when people find out about us? About us? About our friendship? About the fact that I've been caring about you since we were children? About the fact that— She trailed off, color rising in her cheeks. About the fact that what? Harry's voice was barely above a whisper. About the fact that caring about you is becoming more complicated than friendship. Harry's heart hammered against his ribs. Daphne, I know it's probably inappropriate, she said quickly. I know we've only been properly talking for a week. But Harry, I've been thinking about you for 8 years. And now that I finally know you, really know you, now that you know me, what? Now that I know you, I understand why 7-year-old me fell a little bit in love with the idea of you. Daphne's voice was barely audible. And 14-year-old me is falling a little bit in love with the reality of you. Harry felt like someone had cast a cheering charm directly on his heart. I've never had someone understand me the way you do. Is that a good thing or a terrifying thing? Both, Harry said honestly. Definitely both. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of their confession settling between them like something precious and fragile. We should probably call Dobby, Daphne said eventually. If we're going to investigate Dumbledore's mail tampering, we'll need to start gathering evidence. And we should tell Hermione, Harry added. She's brilliant with research, and she knows how to document things properly. Daphne nodded, though Harry caught a flicker of something uncertain in her expression. Will she trust me? A Slytherin she barely knows? She'll trust me, Harry said firmly. And if I trust you, she'll give you a chance. I hope you're right. Daphne gathered her notes. Because if we're going to challenge Dumbledore's authority, we'll need all the allies we can get. Harry stood and moved to the window, looking out at the grounds where snow was beginning to fall. Daphne. Yes? Thank you. For the letters, for believing in me, for everything. When he turned back, Daphne was smiling, not the careful, polite smile she wore in public, but something warm and genuine that made her entire face light up. "Thank you for finally letting me be your friend," she said. "I've been waiting 8 years for this conversation." "Well," Harry said, grinning back at her, "I think it was worth the wait." As they left the abandoned classroom together, Harry realized that for the first time in his life, he wasn't facing his problems alone. He had someone who understood him, someone who believed in him, someone who might even be falling in love with him. Everything was about to change, and for once, Harry wasn't afraid of what came next. Chapter 5. Allies and Enemies. It was inevitable, really, that their secret meetings would eventually be noticed. Harry had grown complacent over the past 2 weeks, too caught up in the joy of finally having someone who understood him to consider how their friendship might appear to others. The reckoning came during breakfast on a Tuesday morning in mid-December. Potter. Harry looked up from his porridge to find Draco Malfoy standing beside the Gryffindor table, his pale face tight with anger. The Great Hall's conversation didn't exactly stop, but it certainly quieted as nearby students turned to watch what was sure to be an entertaining confrontation. "Malfoy," Harry said carefully, "is there something you wanted?" "I want to know what you've done to Daphne Greengrass." The question hit Harry like a hex to the chest. Across the hall, he could see Daphne at the Slytherin table, her face pale as she watched the scene unfold. "I haven't done anything to her," Harry said, keeping his voice level despite his racing heart. "Really?" Malfoy's voice was cold. "Because she's been acting very strangely lately. Missing meals, disappearing for hours, refusing to participate in perfectly normal conversations about blood purity and proper wizarding values. Maybe she's just busy with schoolwork." "Don't lie to me, Potter." Malfoy leaned closer, his voice dropping to a hiss. "I know she's been meeting with you, and I know you've been filling her head with your mudblood-loving nonsense." The insult sparked anger in Harry's chest, but before he could respond, a clear voice cut through the tension. "That's enough, Draco." Everyone turned to see Daphne approaching their table, her chin raised and her blue eyes blazing with fury. "Daphne," Malfoy said, relief evident in his voice. "Finally. Come back to the Slytherin table and we can discuss this privately." "No." Daphne's voice carried clearly across the suddenly silent Great Hall. "We'll discuss it right here, where everyone can hear exactly what you think gives you the right to police my friendships." Harry watched in amazement as Daphne faced down not just Malfoy, but the stares of half the school. She looked fierce and beautiful and absolutely terrifying. "Your father," Malfoy began. "My father doesn't control who I choose to associate with," Daphne cut him off. "And neither do you. If you have a problem with my friendship with Harry, that says more about your character than it does about mine." "Friendship?" Malfoy's voice rose in disbelief. "You can't be serious. He's what, Draco? Famous? Brave? Kind to people regardless of their blood status?" Daphne's voice was dangerously quiet. "Or are you upset because he represents everything you pretend to be, but never could?" The silence in the Great Hall was absolute now. Even the teachers at the high table were watching with barely concealed interest. Malfoy's face flushed red. "You're making a mistake, Daphne. When your parents hear about this—" "My parents will hear about it from me," Daphne said firmly, "and they'll understand that I've chosen to befriend someone who's shown me more genuine kindness in 2 weeks than you've managed in 4 years. With that, she turned to Harry. "May I sit with you? I find I've lost my appetite for breakfast at the Slytherin table." Harry scooted over immediately, acutely aware that every eye in the hall was watching as Daphne Greengrass sat down at the Gryffindor table. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. "Well," Ron said faintly from across the table. That was interesting. Harry realized with a jolt that his best friends had just witnessed the entire confrontation. Ron looked confused and slightly suspicious, while Hermione appeared thoughtful. "Hermione," Harry said carefully. "I'd like you to meet Daphne Greengrass. Daphne, these are my best friends, Ron Weasley and Hermione Granger. Pleasure to meet you both properly, Daphne said, though her voice was still slightly shaky from adrenaline. I've heard wonderful things about you. Hermione leaned forward with interest. Harry mentioned you've been writing to him. That's incredibly thoughtful. Actually, Daphne said, glancing at Harry, there's more to it than that. Harry, perhaps we should explain. Harry nodded and quickly outlined the story of the intercepted letters. He watched his friends' faces carefully, noting Ron's growing anger and Hermione's sharp attention to the legal implications. That's completely illegal, Hermione said when he finished. Interfering with postal delivery, violation of privacy, potentially even guardianship abuse if he was preventing you from receiving support offers. That's what I thought, Daphne said, her respect for Hermione obvious. I was hoping you might help us document everything properly. Your reputation for research is legendary. Hermione flushed with pleasure. Of course I'll help. This is exactly the kind of institutional abuse that needs to be challenged. Hang on, Ron interjected, his expression troubled. You're talking about going against Dumbledore. Are you sure about this, Harry? Harry met his friend's worried gaze. I'm sure that I deserved to know someone was trying to reach me for 8 years. I'm sure that Dumbledore had no right to decide I couldn't have those friendships. Before Ron could respond, another voice interrupted them. Harry, is everything all right? They turned to see Neville Longbottom approaching hesitantly, his round face creased with concern. Everything's fine, Neville, Harry said. Just some house politics. Actually, Neville said, settling into the seat beside Ron, I wanted to talk to you anyway. You seem different lately. Happier, I think. I was wondering if everything was okay. Harry felt warmth bloom in his chest. Things are good, actually. Really good. Neville's smile was genuine. I'm glad. You've seemed so stressed this year, with the tournament and everything. It's nice to see you looking like yourself again. That's what having real friends will do, Daphne said quietly, and Harry felt his cheeks warm at the affection in her voice. Their moment of peace was shattered when Pansy Parkinson appeared at Daphne's shoulder. Daphne, Pansy said, her voice syrupy sweet and completely false. I think you should come back to our table. People are starting to talk. Let them talk, Daphne replied without turning around. Your parents won't be pleased when they hear you're associating with mudbloods and blood traitors. The words hung in the air like a curse. Harry saw Hermione flinch, watched Ron's face flush with anger, felt his own magic responding to the spike of fury that shot through him. But before any of them could respond, Daphne stood slowly and turned to face Pansy. If you ever, Daphne said, her voice deadly calm, use that word in my presence again, you'll discover exactly how creative I can be with hexes. These are my friends, and I won't tolerate anyone speaking about them with such vulgarity. Pansy's face went white. You can't be serious. Try me. The confrontation lasted only seconds, but Harry could see the exact moment when Pansy realized that Daphne meant every word. She backed away slowly, her face a mask of shock and hurt. This isn't over, Pansy said weakly. Yes, Daphne said firmly, it is. As Pansy retreated to the Slytherin table, Harry noticed Professor McGonagall approaching. His heart sank. Surely they were about to be lectured about interhouse conflict, but McGonagall's expression was thoughtful rather than disapproving. Miss Greengrass, she said briskly, that was admirably handled. It's refreshing to see students standing up for what's right rather than what's easy. Daphne blinked in surprise. Thank you, Professor. Mr. Potter, McGonagall continued, I've noticed a marked improvement in your transfiguration work lately. Your focus seems much better. Thank you, ma'am, Harry said, confused by the praise. McGonagall's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. Sometimes the best thing for a student's academic performance is a good friend. Carry on. As the professor walked away, Ron shook his head in amazement. Did McGonagall just approve of Harry having a Slytherin girlfriend? She's not my... Harry began, then caught Daphne's amused expression. "I mean, we're just what?" Daphne asked, raising an eyebrow. Harry felt heat rise in his cheeks. The truth was, he didn't know exactly what they were. More than friends, certainly, but they'd only just begun to explore the possibilities. "We're figuring it out as we go," Daphne said gently, saving him from having to answer. "Well," Hermione said practically, "whatever you are, you've just made your relationship very public. Half the school will be talking about this by lunch." She was right, of course. As they left the Great Hall together, Ron and Hermione flanking Harry, Daphne walking close beside him, Harry could feel the weight of dozens of stares following them. "Are you okay?" he asked Daphne quietly, as they walked toward their first class. "I'm nervous," she admitted, "but also relieved. I'm tired of pretending to be someone I'm not just to keep peace with people I don't even like. And now? Now I get to be myself, with friends who actually know who that is." She smiled at him, and Harry felt his heart skip. It's terrifying and wonderful all at once. They were alone in the corridor now, having left the others at the staircase. Daphne had stopped walking and was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Harry," she said softly, "I meant what I said in there. About you showing me kindness. You've given me something I didn't even know I was missing." "What's that?" "The courage to be myself." Before Harry could respond, Daphne stepped closer and kissed him softly. It was brief and sweet and completely innocent, but it made Harry's entire world tilt on its axis. When they broke apart, Daphne's cheeks were pink and her eyes were bright. "I've been wanting to do that since I was 7 years old," she whispered. Harry's grin felt like it might split his face. "Was it worth the wait?" "Definitely," Daphne said, smiling back, "though I hope I don't have to wait another 8 years for the next one." As they walked to class together, Harry realized that everything had changed in the span of a single breakfast. Their friendship was now public knowledge. They had allies they'd never expected, and enemies they'd always known were there. But most importantly, he'd kissed Daphne Greengrass, and she'd kissed him back. For once in his life, Harry Potter felt like the luckiest person alive. Chapter 6. The second task. Preparation. The first week of January brought with it the familiar post-holiday melancholy that always settled over Hogwarts after the Christmas break. Students trudged through corridors still decorated with frost and tinsel, carrying new books and complaining about forgotten essays. For Harry, however, the new term brought something entirely different: the looming spectre of the second task, and the golden egg that had been taunting him from his bedside table for weeks. "It's definitely magical," Daphne said, examining the egg with the clinical detachment of someone solving a particularly challenging puzzle. They were tucked away in the same abandoned charms classroom they'd claimed as their own, though now it felt less like a hiding place and more like a strategic war room. "But the magic is designed to activate under specific conditions." Harry watched her turn the egg over in her hands, noting the way her brow furrowed in concentration. The past 3 weeks, especially since the Yule Ball, where they'd danced together under the disapproving stares of half the wizarding world, had shown him facets of Daphne's intelligence he'd never had the chance to appreciate before. "Hermione thinks it needs to be opened underwater," Harry said. "She's been researching acoustic magic in the library." "Hermione's probably right," Daphne agreed. "But there's more to it than simple acoustics. Look at these markings along the seam." Harry leaned closer, inhaling the faint scent of parchment and winter roses that always seemed to cling to Daphne's robes. "They look like runes. Old runes, specifically the kind used in treaties between wizards and magical water creatures." Daphne's eyes lit up with the excitement of discovery. "My governess made me study interspecies magical law when I was younger. Pure blood families often have dealings with various magical creatures, and the Greengrasses have had agreements with the merpeople of the Black Lake for centuries." Harry stared at her. "You know about merpeople?" "I know their language is designed to be heard underwater, and I know they consider any surface dweller who ventures into their territory to be either a guest under formal treaty or an enemy to be driven away. Daphne set the egg down carefully. If the second task involves the lake, you'll need to understand their protocols. What kind of protocols? Well, Daphne said thoughtfully, Mer People society is built around concepts of honor and reciprocal obligation. If they're participating in the tournament, it means they've agreed to test you rather than simply defend their territory. But the test will be designed to challenge not just your magical ability, but your character. Harry felt a familiar stir of anxiety in his stomach. My character? Your willingness to sacrifice for others, your loyalty to those you care about, your courage in the face of personal loss. Daphne's voice was gentle, but her words sent a chill down Harry's spine. Mer People don't just test whether you can swim. Harry, they test whether you deserve to. Before Harry could ask what that meant, the classroom door opened, and Hermione hurried in, her arms laden with books and scrolls. She'd thrown herself into researching the second task, with the same intensity she brought to every academic challenge, though Harry suspected her enthusiasm had as much to do with their investigation into Dumbledore's mail tampering as it did with tournament preparation. "I found something," she announced without preamble, spreading her materials across a nearby desk. "Dobby delivered these this morning." Harry's heart leaped as he saw the familiar sight of letters. Not Daphne's this time, but other correspondence bearing his name. The return addresses made his breath catch. R. Lupin, A. Tonks, K. Shacklebolt, and several others he didn't recognize. "How many?" he asked quietly. 17 letters from your 3rd year alone," Hermione replied, her voice tight with anger. "All from people who wanted to help you after they heard about the Dementor attacks." Harry picked up the letter from Lupin with shaking hands. The envelope was addressed in the familiar, careful script he remembered from his defense essays. "This one's dated just after the Quidditch match," he said, reading the postmark. "The day after I fell." "Open it," Daphne urged softly. Harry broke the seal and unfolded the letter, his eyes quickly scanning the contents. As he read, his expression grew darker. "He wanted to teach me advanced defensive magic," Harry said finally. "Patronus casting, shield charms, even some aura-level protective spells. He says—" Harry's voice cracked slightly. "He says he owes it to my parents to make sure I can defend myself." Daphne moved to sit beside him, her hand finding his. "What else?" "He mentions other people. Alice Longbottom, Neville's mum. She wanted to send me some of my mother's personal effects that she'd been keeping safe. Frank's brother wanted to share memories of my father from their aura training." Harry's voice was barely above a whisper. "There's a whole network of people who cared about my parents, who wanted to help me, and I never knew they existed." Hermione picked up another letter. "This one's from Kingsley Shacklebolt. He's offering to provide aura-supervised training during summer holidays, away from the Dursleys." "And this one," Daphne said, examining a 3rd envelope, "is from someone named Andromeda Tonks. She's offering an alternative living arrangement. She mentions being related to your godfather." Harry's head was spinning. "All of these people, they all tried to help me, and Dumbledore just decided you were better off isolated and dependent on him," Daphne finished grimly. "Harry, this isn't just about protecting you from potentially harmful influences. This is about controlling who has access to you." "But why?" Harry looked between his 2 friends, searching for answers that made sense. "What does Dumbledore gain by keeping me cut off from my parents? Friends?" "Power," Hermione said bluntly. "If you have other sources of magical training, other adults you trust, other places you could live, then you're not completely dependent on his guidance." Daphne nodded. "And if you're not completely dependent on his guidance, you might start questioning his decisions, like sending you back to abusive relatives every summer, despite having other options." Harry thought about the pattern they'd uncovered. 8 years of intercepted mail, blocked training opportunities, severed connections with people who'd loved his parents and wanted to help him. It painted a picture that made him feel sick. "What do we do about it?" he asked. "First, we make sure you're prepared for the second task," Hermione said practically. "If Dumbledore's been deliberately limiting your magical education, we need to compensate for that." "I've been thinking about that," Daphne interjected. "Professor Flitwick might be willing to help. He's not just head of Ravenclaw. He was a dueling champion in his youth. If anyone could teach you the kind of advanced magic you'll need, it's him." Harry considered this. Flitwick had always been fair to him, and the tiny professor had a reputation for helping students who showed genuine interest in learning. "Do you think he'd agree to tutor me?" "Only one way to find out," Hermione said. "And Harry? Given what we've learned about Dumbledore's management style, it might be best not to mention this to him directly." The thought of deliberately circumventing Dumbledore's authority should have felt wrong, but instead, Harry found himself nodding. For the first time in his life, he was thinking strategically about his own education, his own preparation, his own survival. "There's something else," Daphne said hesitantly, "about the second task specifically." Harry and Hermione turned to her expectantly. "If I'm right about the Mer-People protocols, the task won't just be about reaching a goal or solving a puzzle. It'll be about proving you're worthy of what you're trying to recover." Daphne's expression was troubled. "And if the Mer-People are following traditional treaty law, what they'll take from you will be something precious, something you can't bear to lose." "What do you mean?" Harry asked, though something cold was settling in his stomach. "I mean they'll take someone you care about," Daphne said quietly. "And the test will be whether you're brave enough to save them, even at personal cost." Harry's blood ran cold. "Someone I care about?" Daphne squeezed his hand. "I'll start researching protective charms and underwater breathing techniques if they take me." "They won't," Harry said fiercely. "I won't let them." "That's rather the point," Daphne said softly. "They want to see if you'll risk everything to save the people you love." As if summoned by their conversation, Dobby appeared in the classroom with his characteristic crack of displaced air. "Harry Potter, sir," the elf squeaked excitedly. "Dobby has found more letters, many more letters." Harry looked at the bundle Dobby carried and felt his resolve harden. Somewhere in that pile were probably more offers of help, more connections to his parents' world, more evidence of Dumbledore's systematic isolation of him. But he also had something Dumbledore probably hadn't counted on. Friends who believed in him, a girlfriend who understood him, and allies who were willing to help him become stronger than anyone expected. "Thank you, Dobby," Harry said. "Keep them coming." As he reached for Daphne's hand and felt her fingers intertwine with his, Harry realized that the scared, isolated boy who'd started this school year was already gone. In his place was someone who was learning to fight back, to seek help, to build his own support network. The second task was still weeks away, but for the first time since his name had come out of the Goblet of Fire, Harry Potter felt ready for whatever was coming. More importantly, he wasn't facing it alone. Chapter 7. The second task. February 24th dawned grey and bitterly cold, with a sharp wind whipping across the black lake that made the water look like hammered pewter. Harry stood at the edge of the dock, listening to Bagman explain the rules of the second task, but his mind was focused on the careful preparations he'd made over the past 6 weeks. Thanks to Professor Flitwick's discreet tutoring sessions, Harry now carried a repertoire of spells that would have been impossible for him to learn on his own. Underwater breathing charms, warming spells to prevent hypothermia, advanced protective magic that could function in aquatic environments, all techniques that Flitwick had seemed delighted to teach to a student who showed such focused determination. "Remember," Daphne had told him that morning, her hands steady as she helped him practice the breathing charm one final time. "The Mer-People will test your character, not just your magical ability. Trust your instincts. Trust what you know is right." Now, looking out at the dark water, where something precious had been taken from him, Harry felt calmer than he'd ever been before a tournament task. He knew who would be waiting for him in the depths. Daphne had been missing from breakfast, and the sick feeling in his stomach had nothing to do with nerves, and everything to do with the urgent need to bring her safely home. When the starting signal sounded, Harry dove cleanly into the lake, the breathing charm taking effect immediately. The underwater world that greeted him was nothing like the hostile, alien environment he'd expected. Thanks to Daphne's briefing on merpeople culture, he recognized the formal arrangement of the underwater settlement, the ceremonial positioning of the hostages, the ritualistic nature of what he was seeing. 4 figures were suspended in the center of the merpeople village: Ron, Hermione, Cho Chang, and Daphne. But Harry's eyes went immediately to Daphne, her pale hair floating around her face like spun moonlight, her expression peaceful in the enchanted sleep. The largest of the merpeople swam forward, his demeanor formal rather than threatening. Harry remembered Daphne's coaching and managed a passable underwater bow, his hands forming the gesture of respectful greeting she'd taught him. The merpeople leader's expression shifted to something that might have been approval, and he gestured for Harry to proceed. Harry swam directly to Daphne, working quickly but carefully to cut her bonds. The merpeople watched him with obvious interest, and Harry realized they were evaluating not just his magical competence, but his priorities, his methods, his respect for their customs. As he prepared to surface with Daphne, Harry noticed that Cedric had already departed with Cho, but Victor and Fleur were nowhere to be seen. The other hostages remained in place, and for a moment Harry hesitated, remembering his tendency to try to save everyone. But Daphne had been very clear in her preparation. The task was designed to test specific relationships. Trying to rescue hostages that weren't his to save would be seen as disrespectful to the other champions and their bonds. "Trust the process," she'd said. "Focus on what matters most." Harry surfaced with Daphne just as she began to stir, the breathing charm holding perfectly as they broke through the grey water. The crowd's cheers seemed distant and unimportant compared to the relief flooding through him as Daphne's eyes opened. "Harry," she said softly, her voice slightly hoarse. "I've got you," he said, supporting her as they swam toward the platform. "You're safe." "I knew you would," she replied, her smile radiant despite her exhaustion. They reached the platform just as Victor emerged with Hermione, which meant Harry had finished second, a significant improvement over what his performance would have been without proper preparation. As he helped Daphne out of the water, Harry felt a fierce satisfaction that had nothing to do with tournament rankings and everything to do with the fact that his preparation, their preparation, had worked. "That was beautifully executed," came a voice from behind them, and they turned to see Fleur Delacour approaching, a towel draped around her shoulders and an expression of genuine curiosity on her face. "Thank you," Harry said, accepting his own towel from a tournament official. "I hope you will not think it presumptuous," Fleur continued, "but I could not help noticing the improvement in your technique since the first task. Your underwater magic was quite sophisticated." Daphne stepped closer to Harry, her hand finding his. "Harry's been working very hard with some excellent tutors." Fleur's eyes sharpened with interest as she looked between them. "Ah, the famous Harry Potter has found himself some strategic advisors, no? Very wise, very unexpected." There was something in her tone that suggested approval rather than criticism, and Harry found himself relaxing slightly. "I've learned that asking for help isn't the same as showing weakness." "Indeed," Fleur said with a knowing smile. "Perhaps we might discuss training techniques sometime. I think we could learn much from each other." As Fleur walked away, Harry realized that his performance in the second task had accomplished something beyond simple survival. It had earned him a different kind of recognition. Not the breathless celebrity worship he was used to, but the professional respect of someone who understood what real preparation looked like. The post-task celebration in the Great Hall should have been a moment of triumph, But Harry quickly realized that his success had come with complications. The Gryffindor table was enthusiastic in their congratulations, but he couldn't help noticing the pointed way several Slytherins were avoiding eye contact with Daphne. "They're angry with me," Daphne said quietly, following his gaze. "Pansy's been particularly vocal about my betrayal of house loyalty. Are you okay with that?" "I'm okay with anything that means I get to be with you," she replied, but Harry caught the slight strain in her voice. Their moment of private conversation was interrupted by Professor Snape materializing at their table with his characteristic dramatic flair. "Miss Greengrass," he said in his silkiest tone, "I believe you have detention with me this evening. Something about incomplete potions essays." Daphne's face went carefully blank. "I turned in my essay on Monday, Professor." "Did you? How curious. I seem to have misplaced it." Snape's smile was cold and predatory. "I'm sure you won't mind completing it again. Tonight, 7 o'clock. Harry felt anger surge through him. "That's ridiculous. Daphne's essays are always perfect." "I wasn't speaking to you, Potter," Snape snapped, "though perhaps you'd like to join Miss Greengrass in detention? I'm sure I could find some infraction to justify it." "That won't be necessary, Professor Snape." The new voice belonged to Professor McGonagall, who approached their table with her characteristic brisk efficiency. "Miss Greengrass," McGonagall continued, "I've been reviewing the academic records, and I notice your transfiguration work has shown remarkable improvement this term. I'd like to discuss some advanced placement options with you. Tonight, if you're available." The message was clear. Daphne would be busy with McGonagall's legitimate academic discussion, making Snape's manufactured detention impossible. Snape's expression darkened. "Professor McGonagall, I believe, McGonagall interrupted coolly, "that Miss Greengrass's academic advancement takes priority over remedial work. Good day, Professor Snape." As Snape stalked away in obvious frustration, McGonagall turned to Harry and Daphne with something that might have been approval. "Congratulations on your performance today, Mr. Potter. It's gratifying to see a student who takes preparation seriously." She paused, then added quietly, "And Miss Greengrass, your study partnership appears to be benefiting both of your academic achievements. Carry on." As McGonagall walked away, Harry and Daphne exchanged amazed glances. "Did she just officially approve of our relationship?" Daphne asked. "I think she did," Harry replied, grinning. Their good mood was dampened somewhat when an owl arrived for Daphne during dessert, carrying a letter with the formal Greengrass family seal. Harry watched Daphne's face grow pale as she read the contents. "What is it?" he asked quietly. "My parents," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "They've heard about us, about my shameful associations and inappropriate public displays. They want explanations." Harry felt his stomach sink. "What kind of explanations?" "The kind where I either end this relationship immediately or face serious consequences for the family's reputation." Daphne's hands were trembling slightly as she folded the letter. "They're demanding I return home for a discussion this weekend." Without hesitation, Harry reached for her hand. "I'll come with you." Daphne stared at him. "Harry, you don't understand. This isn't just a disapproving conversation. This is my parents potentially disowning me for associating with someone they see as beneath our family's station." "Then they'll have to disown both of us," Harry said firmly, "because I'm not letting you face this alone." "Harry," Daphne's voice was soft, and when she looked at him, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You would really do that? Face my parents' anger for me?" "Daphne, I would face 100 dragons for you," Harry said honestly. "Your parents don't scare me nearly as much as the thought of losing you does." Daphne's smile was radiant and heartbreaking at the same time. "I love you," she said quietly. "I know it's probably too soon to say it, and I know it's complicated with everything else going on. But Harry, I love you." "I love you too," Harry replied, the words feeling both natural and momentous. "And I'm not going anywhere." As they sat together in the great hall, hands intertwined despite the stares and whispers around them, Harry realized that the second task had been about more than just rescuing Daphne from the lake. It had been about proving to himself that he could face whatever challenges came their way. And with Daphne beside him, with allies like McGonagall and Flitwick supporting them, and with the growing evidence of Dumbledore's manipulation spurring him forward, Harry Potter felt ready for whatever came next. Even if what came next was meeting the parents of the girl he loved while the wizarding world watched and judged every move they made. Chapter 8. Confronting the Past. The week following the second task brought an unexpected surge of mail to Harry Potter, not the usual fan letters and chocolate frog card requests, but something much more systematic. Hermione had taken over one corner of the room of requirement with her characteristic organizational efficiency, creating what looked like a research command center, complete with color-coded files and cross-reference timelines. "Dobby's been incredibly thorough," she said, gesturing to the stacks of intercepted correspondence that now covered 3 separate tables. "I've organized everything by year and relationship to your parents. The scope of this is... Honestly, Harry, it's staggering." Daphne looked up from her own pile of documents, these ones bearing the formal seals and elegant script of pure-blood families. "My mother's social connections have proven surprisingly useful. Half the sacred 28 families have some record of attempting to contact you over the years." Harry sat heavily in his usual armchair, feeling overwhelmed by the sheer volume of evidence before him. Each letter represented a relationship stolen from him, a connection severed by Dumbledore's systematic interference. "Where do we even begin?" he asked. "With the people who knew your parents best," Hermione said gently, pulling forward a thick folder. "I've identified several categories: your father's Aura colleagues, your mother's international research contacts, family friends from before the war, and..." She hesitated. "Harry, there are letters from Sirius Black." Harry's head snapped up. "From Sirius, but he's in Azkaban," Daphne finished softly. "Or he was, until his escape. Harry, these letters are dated from 1983 through 1993. He's been trying to reach you for years." With trembling hands, Harry opened the first letter from Sirius, dated just 2 years after his parents' death. The handwriting was shaky, but unmistakably desperate. "Harry, I know you can't understand this yet, but I need you to know that I didn't betray your parents. I would never have hurt James and Lily. I loved them more than my own life. Dumbledore won't let me see you, won't even tell me where you are. He says it's for your protection, but Harry, I'm your godfather. Your parents chose me to care for you if something happened to them. I'm going to keep writing until these letters reach you. Someday, somehow, you'll know the truth. Love always." Sirius Harry's vision blurred as he read letter after letter from his godfather, years of desperate attempts to reach him, growing increasingly frantic as the isolation of Azkaban took its toll. The later letters were barely coherent, but the love and desperation in every line was heartbreakingly clear. "He's innocent," Harry whispered. "All these years, and he's innocent." Daphne moved to sit beside him, her hand finding his shoulder. "Harry, I'm so sorry." "Look at this one," Hermione said quietly, pulling forward another folder. "Frank Longbottom's brother, Augustus. He's been trying to contact you since 1984. Harry opened the letter with hands that weren't quite steady. "Dear Harry, you don't know me, but I knew your father well. Frank and James trained together as Auras, and I've been holding some of James's personal effects that Frank asked me to keep safe for you. I have photographs of your parents, some of James's old Quidditch gear, and a collection of letters your mother wrote to Frank and Alice about you when you were a baby. Your parents were so proud of you, Harry. Lily used to write pages about every little thing you did. I understand Dumbledore feels these memories might be too painful for you right now, But when you're ready, I'd like to share them with you. Your parents would have wanted you to know how much you were loved. Yours sincerely, Augustus Longbottom. Photographs, Harry said faintly. Letters about me when I was a baby, all these years, and I never knew they existed. There are more, Daphne said gently, pulling forward another set of letters. International contacts, wizards from France, Germany, even America who worked with your mother on magical research. They've been trying to reach you since you started Hogwarts. One letter, from a Dr. Elizabeth Laurent at the French Ministry of Magic, was particularly detailed. Mr. Potter, your mother was a brilliant researcher and a dear friend. We worked together on protective charm theory during the war years, and her insights into love-based magic were revolutionary. I have copies of her research notes, including work she did specifically on creating magical protections for children. Lily often spoke of wanting to ensure you would be safe and supported, no matter what happened to her and James. I also have personal letters she sent me during your first year of life, filled with stories about your magical incidents and her hopes for your future. If you would like copies of these materials for your personal collection, I would be honored to share them. With admiration, Doctor. Elizabeth Laurent. Harry felt something crack open in his chest. She wrote about me. My mother wrote about me growing up. Harry, Hermione said softly, there are dozens of letters like this. People who loved your parents, who wanted to help you, who had pieces of your family history to share, and Dumbledore intercepted all of it. But why? Harry's voice was rough with emotion. These aren't dangerous people. They're not Death Eaters or dark wizards. They're people who cared about my parents. Daphne's expression was grim as she pulled forward her own research. I think I understand the pattern now. Look at this. Every pure-blood family that offered you alternative guardianship arrangements. The Bones family, the Abbotts, the Longbottoms, all light families with political influence. And these international contacts, Hermione added, they would have given you perspectives on magic and wizarding culture beyond just British tradition. You would have grown up understanding that there were options, alternatives to whatever path Dumbledore wanted you to follow. Harry stared at the evidence spread before him, feeling a cold certainty settle in his stomach. He wanted me isolated, dependent, cut off from anyone who might offer me different guidance or support. The Dursleys weren't just about blood protection, Daphne said quietly. They were about making sure you had nowhere else to turn, no one else to trust. All these people, Harry's voice broke slightly. My godfather rotting in Azkaban, trying to reach me. Augustus Longbottom wanting to share memories of my father. International researchers who worked with my mother. Pure-blood families who would have taken me in. And I never knew any of them existed. The weight of all those lost relationships, all those severed connections, crashed over him like a wave. Harry put his head in his hands and felt grief wash through him, not just for his parents, but for the extended family of friends and allies he'd been denied. I could have grown up knowing I was loved, he whispered. I could have had stories about my parents, photographs, memories from people who actually knew them. Instead, I spent 11 years thinking I was completely alone in the world. Daphne's arms came around him, and Harry leaned into her warmth, letting himself feel the full scope of what had been stolen from him. You're not alone now, she said softly, and we're going to fix this. We're going to contact every single one of these people and rebuild the connections Dumbledore tried to destroy. Is that even possible? Harry asked, lifting his head to meet her eyes. It's not just possible, Hermione said firmly. It's necessary. Harry, you deserve to know your family's history. You deserve to have relationships with people who loved your parents. And you deserve the truth about Sirius Black. Harry nodded slowly, feeling determination crystallize alongside his grief. Where do we start? With Augustus Longbottom, Daphne suggested. He's the safest contact, Order member, respected Aura family, legitimate claim to have your father's effects. If anyone could help us establish a pattern of reaching out, it's him." "And then?" Harry asked. "Then we start building the support network Dumbledore tried to keep you from having," Hermione said. "One letter at a time." As Harry looked around at his friends, Daphne with her analytical mind and pure blood connections, Hermione with her research skills and legal knowledge, he realized that while Dumbledore had stolen his past, he couldn't control Harry's future. "Not anymore. Let's write to Augustus first," Harry said, reaching for parchment and quill. "I want to know about my father. I want to see those photographs. And I want to understand what my mother wrote about me." As he began composing the letter that would be his first step toward reclaiming his stolen heritage, Harry felt something he'd never experienced before. The certainty that he was taking control of his own life. Dumbledore had kept him in the dark for 14 years, but the darkness was ending now. "Daphne," he said suddenly, looking up from his letter. "Thank you. For everything. For writing to me all those years. For helping me see the truth. For being brave enough to stand with me against all of this." Her smile was radiant. "Harry Potter, I've been waiting my whole life to help you come home to yourself. I wouldn't miss it for the world." As he sealed the letter to Augustus Longbottom, Harry realized that Daphne was right. This wasn't just about exposing Dumbledore's manipulation. It was about coming home to the person he was always meant to be, the person his parents' friends had been waiting to meet for 14 years. Chapter 9. Building New Alliances. The response to Harry's letter to Augustus Longbottom came faster than expected, arriving with the Morning Post just 3 days after he'd sent it. The owl that delivered it was sleek and well-groomed, bearing the formal bearing of a professional messenger service, and the letter itself was thick with what felt like additional enclosures. Harry opened it at the Gryffindor table, acutely aware of Daphne watching from across the hall with barely concealed anticipation. Even from this distance, he could see her encouraging nod. "Dear Harry, I cannot express how relieved I am to finally hear from you. I had begun to fear that Dumbledore's concerns about appropriate timing would prevent us from ever connecting. I have enclosed several items I've been holding for you. Photographs of your parents from their Aura training days, a letter your mother wrote to Alice about your first word, and your father's snitch from his final Quidditch match at Hogwarts. James made me promise that if anything happened to him, these would find their way to you when you were ready. More importantly, I've contacted several other friends of your parents who have been hoping to hear from you. Remus Lupin has asked me to arrange a meeting if you're interested. He has much to tell you about your magical heritage that he feels you should know. I understand you've had limited guidance in certain areas of magical development. If you're willing, I would be honored to help remedy that situation. Yours with deep respect for James and Lily's memory, Augustus Longbottom, P.S. I hear you found yourself an excellent strategic advisor in Miss Greengrass. James would have approved. He always said the mark of a wise man was surrounding himself with people smarter than he was. Harry's hands shook as he opened the first of the enclosed photographs. It showed a younger version of his father in Aura training robes, standing beside a man who could only be Frank Longbottom. Both were grinning broadly, their arms slung around each other's shoulders in easy camaraderie. But it was the letter from his mother that made his throat tighten completely. Written in her careful script, it was addressed to Alice Longbottom. Dearest Alice, you'll never believe what happened yesterday. Harry said his first real word, and it wasn't Mama or Dada like we expected. It was light. He was lying in his crib, staring at the sunbeam coming through his window, and he just pointed and said, "Light, as clear as anything." James is convinced this means he'll be brilliant at charms. I think it just means our son is already showing signs of the curiosity that's going to drive us mad for the next 17 years. Either way, we couldn't be prouder. Give our love to Frank and Neville. We can't wait for the boys to grow up together. All my love. Lily, Harry. Hermione's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Are you all right?" Harry looked up to find both his friends watching him with concern. He realized he'd been sitting motionless for several minutes, the letter clutched in his hands. "She wrote about my first word," he said quietly. "About me pointing at sunlight and saying, 'light.'" "That's beautiful," Hermione said softly. "It's also significant," came a new voice, and they turned to see Professor Lupin approaching their table. "May I sit?" Harry nodded, too surprised to speak. Lupin looked older than he had during Harry's third year, the lines around his eyes deeper, but his expression was warm with something that might have been relief. "Augustus contacted me," Lupin explained, settling into the seat beside Harry. "He told me about the letters, about Dumbledore's management of your correspondence. Harry, I'm so sorry. I had no idea." "You tried to write to me?" "Many times." Lupin's voice was heavy with regret. "After the Dementor incidents, after your performance in the tournament, whenever I heard you were in danger. Dumbledore always assured me that direct contact would be inappropriate, that he was monitoring your well-being personally." "But you have things to tell me," Harry said, remembering Augustus's letter. "About my magical heritage." Lupin nodded gravely. "Your mother's letter about your first word. It's more significant than she could have known at the time. Harry, you show signs of having inherited some very rare magical traits, particularly in the area of light-based magic." "Light-based magic?" "Protective magic, healing magic, magic that drives back darkness." Lupin leaned forward slightly. "Your Patronus, for instance, is unusually powerful for your age. Your natural resistance to dark magic goes beyond what your mother's sacrifice provided. These are gifts, Harry, but they're also abilities that require proper training to develop safely." Harry felt something shift inside him, a sense of understanding he'd been searching for without realizing it. "Is that why my magic feels different sometimes? Stronger when I'm protecting people?" "Exactly." Lupin's smile was proud and sad at once. James had some of the same tendencies, though not as pronounced. But Lily was extraordinary. Her protective magic was beyond anything most wizards could achieve. "Could you teach me?" Harry asked impulsively. "To develop these abilities properly?" "I would be honored," Lupin said immediately. "In fact, I've already spoken with Augustus about arranging regular training sessions. Between the two of us, we can give you the foundation you should have had years ago." Over the next several weeks, Harry's world expanded in ways he'd never imagined possible. Augustus Longbottom proved to be not just a connection to his father's past, but a skilled teacher in his own right, specializing in advanced defensive magic and strategic thinking. His sessions with Augustus took place in a private room at the Three Broomsticks, disguised as casual meetings between a family friend and a student. Lupin's training focused on Harry's unique magical heritage, teaching him to channel and control the light-based magic that had been manifesting unconsciously for years. Under Lupin's guidance, Harry learned to cast protective shields that glowed with soft silver light, to heal minor injuries with touch, and to project calming influence that could soothe both magical creatures and frightened people. "It's remarkable," Lupin said during one of their sessions in late April. "You're developing abilities that typically take years to manifest. Your mother would be so proud." But it wasn't just the magical training that transformed Harry's confidence. The international contacts Daphne had helped him reach were beginning to respond with offers that left him amazed. Dr. Elizabeth Laurent from France sent detailed training curricula for advanced protective magic, along with an invitation to spend part of his summer break studying at the French Ministry's Department of International Magical Cooperation. A wizard from the German ministry offered access to their specialized library on defensive magic theory. Even the American magical community had reached out, with several former colleagues of Lily's offering both training opportunities and alternative living arrangements. "You're building quite a network," Daphne observed one evening, as they sat together, reviewing the latest round of correspondence. They were in the room of requirement again, though now it had configured itself as a comfortable study with a fireplace and deep armchairs that had become their favorite place for private conversations. "We're building it," Harry corrected, reaching for her hand. "I never could have made these connections without your help." Daphne's family connections had indeed proven invaluable. Through carefully worded inquiries channeled through her parents' social network, she had identified several prominent pure-blood families who had questioned Harry's placement with the Dursleys and would be willing to offer alternative guardianship arrangements. "The Bones family has sent a formal letter of intent," Daphne reported, consulting her notes. "They're willing to provide summer housing and have connections throughout the ministry that could facilitate proper magical education." "And the legal situation?" "Hermione's research has turned up some very interesting precedents," Daphne said with a small smile. "Apparently, Dumbledore's authority as your magical guardian has some significant limitations. He was appointed to ensure your safety and education, not to control your social connections or dictate your living arrangements against your will." Harry looked at the growing pile of training offers, guardianship proposals, and connection requests from people who had known and loved his parents. For the first time in his life, he had choices. Real choices about where to live, who to trust, how to develop his magical abilities. "There's something else," Daphne said, hesitantly. "The Greengrass family spring gathering is next weekend. It's essentially a political networking event disguised as a garden party. Several of the families who've reached out to you will be there." Harry understood immediately. "You want me to meet them? To let them meet me?" "Only if you're comfortable with it," Daphne said quickly. "But Harry, these are people who've been wondering about you for years, seeing you happy and confident, seeing that you've found good friends and proper support. It might help strengthen the legal and political foundation for challenging Dumbledore's guardianship decisions." The thought of attending a pure-blood social gathering should have terrified him, but instead, Harry found himself curious. These weren't Death Eaters or blood purists. They were families who had questioned his treatment, who had offered help, who had maintained loyalty to his parents' memory. "Would you be there? With me?" Daphne's smile was radiant. "Harry Potter, I've been waiting my whole life to introduce you to people as the boy I love. Try and stop me." As they made plans for what would essentially be Harry's debut in wizarding society outside of Hogwarts, Harry reflected on how completely his world had changed. 3 months ago, he'd been isolated, dependent on Dumbledore's guidance, and convinced he had no options beyond what he was given. Now he had mentors teaching him advanced magic, allies offering protection and support, legal options for changing his circumstances, and most importantly, people who cared about him for who he was, rather than what he represented. The third task was still 2 months away, but Harry was no longer approaching it with dread. With proper training from Augustus and Lupin, strategic advice from Daphne and Hermione, and a growing network of supporters, he felt ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. More than ready. For the first time in his life, Harry Potter felt like he was exactly where he belonged. Surrounded by people who believed in him, armed with knowledge he'd been denied for too long, and confident in his ability to face whatever came next. The scared, isolated boy who had started this school year was gone forever. In his place stood someone who knew he was loved, someone who had choices, someone who was finally coming into his own power. And it felt absolutely extraordinary. Chapter 10. The Third Task and Consequences. The maze rose before Harry like a living wall of green darkness, its hedges towering 20 feet high and rustling with an ominous energy that seemed to pulse with malevolent intent. But for the first time in his tournament experience, Harry felt genuinely prepared for what lay ahead. 2 months of intensive training with Lupin and Augustus Longbottom had transformed not just his magical abilities, but his entire approach to dangerous situations. Where once he would have charged forward with reckless bravery, now he moved with calculated precision, every spell and strategy carefully considered. "Remember," Daphne had told him that morning, her hand steady as she helped him practice detection charms one final time. The maze isn't just about reaching the center. It's about proving you can navigate complex challenges while maintaining your principles. Harry touched the small mirror in his pocket, a gift from Augustus that would allow him to call for help if the situation became truly desperate. Not that he expected to need it, but having options was something he'd learned to value deeply. When Bagman's whistle sounded, Harry entered the maze with the fluid grace of someone who had spent months learning to read magical environments. The detection spells Lupin had taught him immediately revealed 3 different path options ahead, each glowing with different intensities of magical resonance. He chose the middle path, not because it seemed easiest, but because his enhanced magical senses told him it led most directly toward the center, while avoiding the heaviest concentrations of dangerous creatures. The first challenge came in the form of a sphinx, but rather than attempting to answer its riddle through guesswork, Harry used the research techniques Hermione had taught him and the strategic thinking Augustus had drilled into him. He listened carefully to the riddle, identified its mythological references, and provided an answer that demonstrated not just intelligence, but genuine understanding of magical lore. The Sphinx stepped aside with what seemed like approval, and Harry continued deeper into the maze. When he encountered the blast-ended Scroot that had terrorized Cedric in the original timeline, Harry was ready with the creature-calming techniques Lupin had taught him. Rather than fighting or fleeing, he projected the soothing magical influence that was becoming second nature to him. Combined with protective shields that glowed with soft silver light, the Scroot, pacified by the combination of magical techniques, allowed him to pass without incident. By the time Harry reached the center of the maze, he had navigated every challenge with a competence that would have been impossible months earlier. The Triwizard Cup gleamed before him, but Harry approached it cautiously, his enhanced magical senses detecting something unusual about the artifact. The portkey magic wrapping around the cup was wrong, aggressive and foreign in a way that made his new protective instincts flare with warning. This wasn't the victory teleport he expected, but something darker and more dangerous. Harry pulled out the mirror Augustus had given him and spoke the activation word. Augustus's face appeared immediately. "Harry, we made it," Cedric said enthusiastically. "Take it together." "Wait," Harry said quickly. "Cedric, something's wrong with the cup. It's been turned into an unauthorized portkey." Cedric's expression shifted from excitement to confusion. "How can you tell?" "Training," Harry said simply, then raised his voice. "We need to wait for the judges before touching anything." It took only minutes for the tournament officials to arrive, Dumbledore leading the group with his wand already drawn. But instead of the relief Harry expected to see on the headmaster's face, he caught something that looked almost like disappointment. "Mr. Potter," Dumbledore said carefully, "are you certain about the portkey magic?" "Completely certain," Harry replied, demonstrating the detection spell Lupin had taught him. The malevolent aura around the cup became visible to everyone present, dark tendrils of magic that had no place in a school tournament. The investigation that followed revealed that the cup had indeed been tampered with, turned into a portkey that would have transported whoever touched it to an undisclosed location. The intended trap was dismantled, the perpetrator unknown, but clearly someone with both access to the tournament and advanced magical skills. Harry's performance in the third task, combined with his crucial detection of the tampered cup, earned him not just victory in the tournament, but recognition as someone who had matured far beyond his years. The post-task interviews revealed the extent of his transformation. Where once Harry had stumbled over words and downplayed his achievements, now he spoke with quiet confidence about the importance of proper preparation, strategic thinking, and surrounding himself with knowledgeable mentors. "Mr. Potter," Rita Skeeter said, her quill poised with obvious interest, "your performance tonight was remarkably different from your previous tasks. What accounts for this dramatic improvement?" "Good teachers," Harry said simply. "People who believed I was capable of more than I'd been achieving, and were willing to help me reach that potential." And who might these mysterious mentors be? Harry's smile was polite, but revealed nothing. People who knew my parents, people who felt I deserved the same quality of magical education they would have provided. The article that appeared in the Daily Prophet the next morning focused heavily on Harry's secret advisors and the implications of his dramatically improved performance. But it was Dumbledore's reaction to the article that truly revealed the depth of the changes in Harry's situation. The summons to the headmaster's office came before breakfast, delivered by a grim-faced Professor McGonagall, who seemed unusually tense. "Harry," she said quietly, "I think you should know that Professor Dumbledore is displeased about some of the contacts you've been making outside of school." "I figured he might be," Harry replied. "Is Daphne coming with me?" "I believe Miss Greengrass is already on her way to the office," McGonagall said. "Harry, be careful. Dumbledore is not accustomed to having his guidance questioned." The circular office felt different this time as Harry climbed the spiral staircase. Where once the space had seemed magical and welcoming, now it felt oppressive, filled with watching portraits and whirring instruments that seemed designed to monitor rather than assist. Daphne was already there, sitting straight-backed in one of the chairs facing Dumbledore's desk, her expression calm but alert. She gave Harry an encouraging nod as he took the seat beside her. "Harry," Dumbledore began without preamble, "I understand you've been making unauthorized contact with various individuals outside of our school community." "I've been getting to know people who knew my parents," Harry corrected, his voice steady. "People you've been preventing me from contacting for years. I have been protecting you from influences that might not have your best interests at heart. Like Remus Lupin," Harry's voice carried a dangerous edge. "Like Augustus Longbottom, who's been holding my father's personal effects for me since I was 1 year old. Like Dr. Laurent, who worked with my mother and wanted to share her research notes." Dumbledore's blue eyes had lost their usual twinkle. "Harry, you must understand that your situation requires careful management. There are dangers you're not yet equipped to comprehend." "I comprehended the tampered portkey just fine last night," Harry shot back, "using skills you never bothered to teach me but that Remus and Augustus did. I comprehended it well enough to prevent whatever trap had been set for me and Cedric. That was fortunate," Dumbledore said carefully. "Fortunate?" Harry stood up, his control finally breaking. "Fortunate that I had proper training? Fortunate that someone taught me detection spells and strategic thinking? Professor, for 14 years you kept me isolated from everyone who might have helped me develop the skills I actually needed." Daphne rose to stand beside him, her presence a steadying force even in the face of Dumbledore's displeasure. "The correspondence you intercepted," Harry continued, his voice rising, "included letters from people offering me magical training, emotional support, alternative living situations, and connections to my parents' world. You decided I wasn't allowed to have any of that. I decided it was not yet time. You decided to keep me dependent on you." Harry's magical energy was crackling around him now, responding to his emotional intensity. "Every time I might have had another source of guidance, another adult to trust, another option for my future, you made sure I never knew they existed." Dumbledore's expression had grown cold. "Your anger is understandable but misguided. Harry, everything I have done has been in service of protecting you from a threat you cannot yet comprehend." "What threat?" Harry demanded. "What possible threat could justify cutting me off from my godfather's letters, from my father's best friend, from international colleagues of my mother's? What threat was so great that I had to spend 11 years thinking I was completely alone in the world?" The silence that followed was broken only by the soft whirring of the silver instruments and the gentle snoring of sleeping portraits. "I believe," came a new voice from the doorway, "that Mr. Potter deserves an answer to that question." They turned to see Professor McGonagall standing in the entrance, her expression stern and watchful. "Minerva," Dumbledore said carefully, This is a private conversation. About a student's welfare and educational development, McGonagall replied crisply, stepping fully into the room. Which makes it very much my concern, as Deputy Headmistress. She looked directly at Harry. I've been reviewing the documentation Miss Granger compiled about the intercepted correspondence. The scope of it is troubling. Minerva, you don't understand the full situation. I understand, McGonagall cut him off, that a 14-year-old boy has been systematically isolated from people who loved his parents and wanted to help him. I understand that he's been denied access to his own family history and proper magical education, and I understand that the results speak for themselves. She gestured toward Harry. Look at him, Albus. Look at the confidence, the competence, the strategic thinking he's developed in just a few months of proper support. This is what he could have been all along if you'd allowed him the guidance he deserved. Harry felt something shift in the room's dynamic. For the first time, he wasn't facing Dumbledore alone. I formally request, Harry said quietly, that my magical guardianship be transferred to someone who will respect my right to know my own family and make my own choices about my relationships and education. Dumbledore's face had gone very pale. Harry, you don't understand what you're asking. I understand that I'm asking for the same rights every other student has, Harry replied. The right to correspond with people who care about me. The right to learn about my parents from people who actually knew them. The right to choose my own path. And I'll be supporting him in that request, Daphne said firmly, speaking for the first time since Harry's arrival. Whatever the consequences. The confrontation might have continued, but they were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. Augustus Longbottom stepped into the office, his formal aura bearing, making him an imposing figure, despite his quiet demeanor. I believe, he said calmly, there are some legal documents that require attention. Harry, when you're ready, there are several guardianship options we need to discuss. As Harry stood to leave with Augustus and Daphne, he felt the weight of 14 years lifting from his shoulders. For the first time in his life, he was walking away from Albus Dumbledore on his own terms, with his own allies, toward his own chosen future. The scared, isolated boy who had started this school year was truly gone. In his place stood someone who knew his own worth, who had people who believed in him, and who refused to be anyone's pawn ever again. Chapter 11. A New Path Forward. The transformation of Harry's life continued at breathtaking speed in the days following the third task confrontation. What had begun as a desperate investigation into intercepted letters had evolved into something much larger. A complete restructuring of his magical education, living situation, and future prospects. 3 formal guardianship offers, Augustus Longbottom said, spreading the documents across the table in the private room at the 3 broomsticks that had become their unofficial planning headquarters. The Bones family, the Abbott family, and the Tonks family have all submitted legally binding proposals. Harry studied the parchments, still amazed that he had choices, real choices about where to spend his summer, who would guide his magical development, and how he wanted to shape his future. The Bones offer is particularly comprehensive, Hermione observed, consulting her ever-present notebook. Amelia Bones has connections throughout the ministry that could facilitate advanced magical training, and Susan speaks very highly of her aunt's commitment to student welfare. The Tonks arrangement is interesting, Daphne added thoughtfully. Andromeda Tonks has been researching your family history extensively. She could provide connections not just to your parents' world, but to your magical heritage more broadly. Harry appreciated their analysis, but found himself focusing on a different consideration entirely. Which family would be most understanding about? Us. Daphne's cheeks colored slightly, but her smile was radiant. Harry Potter, are you saying that your choice of magical guardian is influenced by their willingness to accept your girlfriend? I'm saying, Harry replied seriously, that I'm not going to let anyone separate us again. We've lost enough time already. The past week had indeed proven challenging on the relationship front. The Daily Prophet's coverage of Harry's mysterious advisors had sparked intense speculation about his romantic life, and several pure-blood families had reached out to the Greengrasses with pointed questions about their daughters' associations. "My parents want to meet you," Daphne said, her voice carefully neutral. "Formally. This weekend." Harry felt his stomach lurch. "Are you ready for that? For whatever they might say?" "I'm ready for them to see who you really are," Daphne replied firmly. "I'm ready for them to understand that this isn't some teenage rebellion or political statement. I love you, Harry, and I want them to see why." The meeting with Lord and Lady Greengrass took place at their family estate, a sprawling manor house that managed to be both elegant and somehow welcoming. Harry had spent the morning with Lupin, reviewing proper etiquette for formal pure-blood interactions, but found himself surprisingly calm as he approached the imposing front entrance. "Remember," Daphne said softly as they waited for the door to open, "they're expecting the famous Harry Potter. Show them the real you instead." Lord Greengrass was a tall, distinguished man with Daphne's intelligent eyes and an air of careful reserve. Lady Greengrass was more obviously formidable, her posture regal and her gaze sharply assessing. Both watched Harry with the intensity of people evaluating a significant investment. "Mr. Potter," Lord Greengrass said formally, "welcome to Greengrass Manor." "Thank you for inviting me, sir," Harry replied, offering a respectful bow that drew an approving nod from Lady Greengrass. The formal luncheon that followed was unlike anything Harry had experienced. The conversation moved seamlessly between magical theory, international politics, family history, and current events, with both parents clearly testing Harry's knowledge and opinions. But rather than feeling intimidated, Harry found himself genuinely enjoying the intellectual challenge. Months of discussions with Daphne, combined with his recent education from Lupin and Augustus, had given him a foundation of knowledge he'd never possessed before. "Your perspective on the recent changes in magical creature legislation is quite sophisticated," Lady Greengrass observed, after Harry offered a nuanced analysis of goblin rights issues. "I've had excellent teachers recently," Harry said, glancing at Daphne with a small smile, "both in formal magical education and in understanding political complexities." "And what are your intentions regarding our daughter?" Lord Greengrass asked bluntly. Harry had expected this question, but the directness of it still made his heart race. "I intend to support her, respect her, and learn from her for as long as she'll have me in her life. She's made me a better person and a better wizard. I hope I can do the same for her." The silence that followed felt endless, but when Harry looked at Daphne, her expression was radiantly proud. "Daphne tells us you've been questioning some traditional educational approaches," Lady Greengrass said carefully. "I've been pursuing the magical education I should have received years ago," Harry corrected gently. "I'm grateful to the people who've helped me understand that I had options beyond what I was originally offered, including international study opportunities. Several, actually." Harry pulled out a folder of correspondence he'd brought specifically for this moment. "Dr. Laurent from the French Ministry has offered a summer research program in protective magic theory. The German Department of Magical Education has extended an invitation to study advanced defensive magic, and Professor Morrison from the American Academy of Magical Arts has suggested a cultural exchange program." Both parents leaned forward with obvious interest, and Harry realized this was the moment of truth. "But I've also received offers from British families who knew my parents and want to provide more traditional guardianship arrangements. I'm hoping to find a balance that allows me to pursue advanced education while maintaining the connections I've built here." "Including your connection to Daphne," Lord Greengrass said, and it wasn't quite a question. "Especially my connection to Daphne," Harry replied honestly. The conversation continued for another hour, covering everything from Harry's magical heritage to his plans for continuing his education. By the end, Harry could see both parents beginning to relax, their initial wariness giving way to something that looked like cautious approval. "You're not what we expected," Lady Greengrass said finally. "Neither was Daphne when she first wrote to me," Harry replied with a smile. "The best things in my life have been unexpected." As they prepared to leave, Lord Greengrass drew Harry aside for a private word. "Mr. Potter," he said quietly, "our daughter has been happier in recent months than I've seen her in years. If you're the cause of that happiness, then you have our support. But if you ever cause her pain, I'll cause myself more pain than you ever could," Harry finished seriously. "Sir, Daphne saved my life before I even knew I needed saving. I won't forget that." The ride back to Hogwarts passed in comfortable silence, both of them processing the success of the meeting. It wasn't until they were back in the room of requirement that Daphne finally spoke. "They like you," she said, sounding almost surprised. "Your parents are impressive people," Harry replied. "I can see where you get your intelligence and determination. And your willingness to stand up for what you believe in clearly impressed them." Daphne settled beside him on their usual sofa. "Harry, they've agreed to support whatever educational arrangements we want to pursue. Together. Together. Dr. Laurent's program accepts pairs of students for collaborative research projects. The German ministry has a partner track for international exchange students. Even Professor Morrison mentioned that the best magical education happens when students can support each other's learning." Harry felt his heart expand with possibility. "You want to spend the summer studying advanced magic with me?" "I want to spend every summer studying advanced magic with you," Daphne said seriously. "I want to spend our 5th year developing the skills we'll need to graduate with honors. I want to spend our 6th and 7th years preparing for whatever careers we choose to pursue. And I want to do all of it together." The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door that materialized when the room sensed their willingness to accept visitors. Hermione entered, followed by Neville, both carrying what looked like official Hogwarts correspondence. "McGonagall asked us to deliver these," Hermione said, handing over sealed envelopes. "They're your course selection forms for 5th year, but apparently there are some special options available." Harry opened his envelope to find not just the standard course list, but additional materials describing advanced independent study options, mentorship programs, and accelerated learning tracks. "Look at this," he said, showing the others a particular pamphlet. "They're offering a new program for students with demonstrated exceptional circumstances, individualized curricula designed around specific career goals and learning styles." "That's perfect for us," Daphne said immediately. "We could design our own course of study that incorporates the training you've been receiving from Lupin and Augustus. And the international connections you've both been developing," Neville added with growing excitement. "Harry, this could be exactly what you need to prepare for, well, whatever comes next." As they spread the various educational options across the table, Harry felt a deep sense of gratitude for how completely his world had transformed. 6 months ago, he'd been isolated, dependent, and convinced he had no choices about his education or future. Now he had mentors who respected his intelligence, friends who supported his growth, a girlfriend who challenged him to be better, and educational opportunities he couldn't have imagined. "There's one more thing," Hermione said, hesitantly. "Dumbledore asked to see you before the end of term. He wants to discuss your plans for next year." Harry's good mood didn't dim. "Then I'll go see him. But this time, I'm setting the terms of the conversation." The meeting with Dumbledore took place the next morning in the familiar circular office, but Harry entered the space with a confidence he'd never possessed before. He was no longer the isolated boy seeking approval from the only adult he thought he could trust. "Harry," Dumbledore began, "I hope you understand that everything I've done has been motivated by concern for your welfare." "I understand that you believe that," Harry replied calmly. "But, Professor, I also understand that your concern doesn't give you the right to control every aspect of my life. The dangers you face are dangers I'm better equipped to handle with proper training, strong relationships, and multiple sources of guidance," Harry interrupted firmly. "The isolation you've maintained wasn't protecting me. It was making me vulnerable." Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment, his blue eyes studying Harry with what might have been resignation. "What do you want from me, Harry?" "I want you to respect my decisions about my own life," Harry said simply. "I want you to treat me as a student, not as a chess piece. And I want you to understand that while I'm grateful for the education Hogwarts has provided, my magical development doesn't begin and end with what you think I should know. And if I disagree with your choices, then you disagree with them," Harry said with a slight smile. "But you don't get to override them anymore." As Harry left Dumbledore's office for what he knew would be the last time as a supplicant, he felt the final pieces of his transformation settling into place. He was no longer Harry Potter, the boy who had things done to him. He was Harry Potter, the young man who made his own decisions and lived with their consequences. And with Daphne beside him, with mentors who respected him, and with a future full of possibilities, he couldn't wait to see what came next. Chapter 12. The Letter's Legacy. The sun was setting over the gardens of Bones Manor, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose that reminded Harry of better mornings than he'd ever thought possible. He sat in the comfortable window seat of his new bedroom, his room, in a house where he was wanted, with 8 familiar letters spread across his lap. Daphne sat beside him, her shoulder warm against his, both of them reading the correspondence that had started everything. In the month since he'd discovered these letters hidden in Dumbledore's desk, Harry had read them countless times. But tonight felt different. Tonight, they weren't evidence of manipulation or symbols of lost opportunities. Tonight, they were simply the first chapters of the most important relationship of his life. "Listen to this," Daphne said softly, holding up the letter she'd written when she was 9 years old. "I hope you have toys and books and someone to read you stories. My daddy reads to me every night before bed, and it makes me feel safe." Harry smiled, remembering how those words had hit him like a physical blow when he'd first read them. "You were trying to make sure I knew what love looked like." "I was trying to make sure you knew someone was thinking about you," Daphne corrected gently. "I was 9. I didn't really understand love yet. But I understood loneliness." "And you understood hope," Harry added, picking up another letter. "Even when I never wrote back, you kept believing that someday we'd connect." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the last light fade from the gardens, where Amelia Bones grew herbs for both cooking and healing potions. It was hard to believe that just 6 months ago, Harry had been living in his tiny bedroom at Privet Drive, convinced he had no choices and no one who truly understood him. "Daphne," Harry said quietly, "I need to tell you something." She looked up at him with those intelligent blue eyes that had been watching him with care since they were children. "What is it?" "I've never written you a letter." The observation was so simple, so obvious, that it took Daphne a moment to understand what he meant. When she did, her expression softened with something that looked like wonder. "You've never written me a letter," she repeated. "In all these months of talking and planning and falling in love, we've never once communicated through letters. You spent 8 years writing to me, and I've never written back," Harry continued. "I think it's time I fixed that." He reached for the parchment and quill he'd set aside for this moment, his movements careful and deliberate. This wasn't just any letter. It was his first letter to the girl who had saved his life before he even knew he needed saving. "Dearest Daphne, I know this is probably 8 years too late, but I wanted to finally write you the letter I should have sent when I was 7 years old. Thank you for seeing me when I couldn't see myself. Thank you for caring about a stranger just because you thought he needed someone to care about him. Thank you for believing that kindness mattered even when it seemed like no one was listening. You gave me hope when I didn't even know what hope was. You gave me the idea that someone, somewhere, might understand what it felt like to be lonely and scared and convinced you were completely alone in the world. I love you for who you are now, brilliant and brave and absolutely fierce when you need to be. But I also love you for who you were at 7 years old. A little girl who saw someone who might need a friend and decided to be that friend, no matter what. Your letters didn't just tell me I wasn't alone. They made me believe I was worth caring about. That's a gift I can never repay, but I can spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of it. All my love, Harry P.S. I've enclosed a chocolate frog card of your favorite Quidditch player. I know it's not much, but I wanted you to know what it feels like to receive a gift from someone who's thinking about you. When he finished writing, Harry folded the letter carefully and handed it to Daphne. She opened it slowly, her eyes scanning the words with the same attention she'd once given to her schoolwork. "Harry," she said, and her voice was soft with unshed tears. "This is perfect. It's 8 years late." "It's exactly on time," she corrected firmly. "Everything happened exactly when it needed to happen. If you'd received my letters when we were 7, we would have been different people. We wouldn't have learned what we were capable of, what we were willing to fight for." She set the letter aside carefully and picked up her own quill. "Besides, now it's my turn to write back. My dearest Harry, thank you for finally writing to me. It was absolutely worth the wait. I want you to know that every letter I sent you over the years was an act of faith. Faith that someday you'd know someone had been thinking about you. Faith that kindness mattered even when it went unnoticed. Faith that love could survive even when it was one-sided. But it was never really one-sided, was it? You were always writing back to me, even when you didn't know it. Every time you chose to protect someone weaker than yourself. Every time you refused to let the darkness make you cruel. Every time you kept hoping despite having every reason to give up. You were writing back to me. You were proving that the boy I'd fallen in love with from a distance was exactly who I thought he was. I love you, Harry Potter. I love the hero you never wanted to be, and the friend you always chose to be, and the young man you're growing into. Most of all, I love that you've finally learned to love yourself. Forever yours, Daphne P.S. I'm starting a new letter-writing tradition. From now on, I'm writing to you every week, whether we're together or apart. Because some things are worth putting into words, and you're worth all the words I'll ever have. As the last light faded completely from the sky, they found themselves curled together in the window seat, reading and rereading their new letters by the warm glow of the magical lamps Amelia had installed throughout the house. "I can't believe how different everything is," Harry said eventually. "Different how?" 6 months ago, I was going back to Privet Drive for another summer of being ignored and resented. Now I'm living with people who actually want me here, planning advanced magical study with the girl I love, and looking forward to a 5th year where I get to make my own choices about my education." Daphne smiled. "Don't forget the part where you have mentors who respect your intelligence, friends who support your growth, and a godfather whose innocence will probably be proven soon." Harry's expression grew thoughtful. "Do you really think we'll be able to help Sirius?" "I think," Daphne said carefully, "that you now have access to legal resources and political connections that could make a real difference. Augustus has contacts in the Aura Department. Amelia Bones runs the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, and your international allies have perspectives on justice that might prove valuable. Another project for us to work on together?" "Another project for us to work on together," she confirmed with a smile. A soft knock on the door interrupted their conversation, and Amelia Bones peered into the room with the sort of fond expression that still amazed Harry with its genuine warmth. "I don't mean to intrude," she said kindly, "but Daphne, your parents sent an owl saying they'll be here to collect you in an hour. I wanted to make sure you had time to say goodbye properly." Harry felt his stomach sink slightly. Even though they'd be seeing each other in just a few days for their joint study session with Dr. Laurent, the thought of Daphne leaving still made him feel oddly bereft. "Actually," Daphne said, standing and smoothing her robes, "I have something for Harry before I go." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, elegantly wrapped package. "I wanted to give you this when we were alone." Harry opened it to find a leather-bound journal, its pages blank and waiting. On the cover, embossed in silver, were the words, "For letters that reach their destination." "It's for our new tradition," Daphne explained. "Weekly letters, remember? Even when we're in the same castle, even when we're sitting next to each other. Some conversations are worth preserving. Daphne," Harry's voice was rough with emotion, "this is perfect." "Good," she said, then leaned up to kiss him softly. "Because I have about 50 letters worth of things I want to tell you." An hour later, Harry stood in the garden, watching the elegant carriage that carried Daphne home disappear into the summer twilight. But instead of the hollow loneliness that partings used to bring, he felt only anticipation for their next meeting, and gratitude for the certainty that there would always be a next meeting. Inside the house, Amelia was preparing tea and asking about his plans for tomorrow's study session. Susan Bones was curled up in the sitting room, reading a book on advanced charms theory, occasionally calling out interesting facts she thought Harry might enjoy. The house was full of warmth and life, and the kind of genuine care Harry had spent years believing was impossible. Later that evening, as Harry sat at his own desk, in his room, in a house where he belonged, he opened the leather journal Daphne had given him and began to write. "My darling Daphne, it's been exactly 3 hours since you left, and I'm already missing you. But not the desperate, frightened missing I used to feel when people I cared about went away. This is different. This is the missing that comes from knowing someone loves you and knowing they'll be back. I keep thinking about something you said tonight, about how every choice I made over the years was like writing back to you. I think you were right, but I also think it worked both ways. Every letter you sent me, even though I never received them, was shaping who I became. Somehow, across all those years of separation, we were raising each other. You were teaching me to believe in kindness, and I was learning to be worthy of it. You were showing me what love looked like, and I was practicing how to recognize it. I understand now why Dumbledore was so determined to keep your letters from me. It wasn't just about controlling my relationships or my education. It was about preventing me from learning that I was already loved, already worthy, already connected to something larger than his plans for my life. But he failed, didn't he? Because love finds a way, even when it's blocked and hidden and buried under years of manipulation. Your love found me anyway. It found me in a hidden compartment in a desk, in a confrontation that changed everything, in the discovery that I'd never been as alone as I thought. I love you, Daphne Greengrass. I love your letters, your intelligence, your courage, and your absolute refusal to let anyone tell you who you're allowed to care about. Most of all, I love that you saw something worth saving in a lonely boy you'd never met, and you never stopped believing it was there. Forever yours, Harry P.S. I'm looking forward to a lifetime of letters that actually reach their destination. As Harry sealed the letter and set it aside for tomorrow's owl post, he realized that for the first time in his life, he understood the difference between letters intercepted and letters received. The difference was hope. The difference was connection. The difference was the absolute certainty that someone, somewhere, was thinking about you and wishing you well. The difference was love. And Harry Potter, surrounded by people who cared about him, and armed with the knowledge that he was worthy of that care, had never felt more loved in his life.